All right, today we're doing more than just retelling an old Hollywood legend. We're opening up a detective's notebook, diving deep into one of America's most infamous cold cases, the murder of Elizabeth Short, a name you probably know better as the Black Dahlia.
So, picture this. It's January 1947. Los Angeles, a city of, glittering Hollywood dreams, but also full of these really deep, dark shadows. It was just the perfect noir-soaked stage for a crime that would absolutely grip the entire nation and honestly refused to let go for over 7 decades now.
The discovery itself was, it was unbelievably gruesome. And the victim? A young woman, just 22 years old, who'd come to Hollywood with big dreams. The press went wild, and they quickly sensationalized the whole thing, giving her that unforgettable nickname, the Black Dahlia. Her murder didn't just launch a media frenzy. It kicked off one of the biggest, most confusing investigations the LAPD had ever seen.
But here's the thing. If you push past all that Hollywood legend, all the endless speculation, you find a trail of cold, hard evidence, and it's buried deep in official case files. So let's dive right in, because what these documents show us, it's a story that's way more shocking than any of the myths you've heard.
Okay, so the very first thing that just jumped out to investigators was the killer's method. The way her body was severed, it was done with the precision of a surgeon. This was not some random, frantic act of violence. No way. This was the work of a skilled, very methodical hand, and it immediately led detectives to believe that their suspect probably had some kind of medical training. Now, one of the most famous parts of the whole Dahlia story, you've probably heard this, is the so-called missing week. These are the 6 days between January 9th, when she was last seen in the Biltmore Hotel lobby, and January 15th, when her body was found. The legend says she just, poof, vanished into thin air.
And yeah, it's a really dramatic story, right? But it completely falls apart the second you look at the actual investigation records. So, what if she was never missing at all? Let's take a look at the timeline from the district attorney's own files.
Okay, check this out. This timeline just completely dismantles that whole myth. The official files, they document 12 separate reliable witness sightings, and get this, on every single day of that so-called missing week. 6 of these people actually knew Elizabeth personally and even talked with her. The truth is, she wasn't missing. She was just out and about, moving through the city.
And this right here is a really crucial point. The final confirmed sighting was by an on-duty LAPD officer, Merrill McBride. Just a few hours before her murder, she saw Elizabeth leaving a downtown bar with 2 men and a woman. So think about that. This wasn't some random abduction out of the shadows. The evidence points to something planned, an event with people she was apparently with willingly. Okay, so let's shift gears and focus on a really key witness, a guy named Robert "Red" Manley. He's the salesman who drove Elizabeth to the Biltmore Hotel on January 9th. So he's right there at the center of that whole last seen alive legend.
Now, Manley was looked at really hard at the beginning, but he was cleared pretty quickly. He passed the polygraph, had a rock-solid alibi for the time of the murder. He was in the clear. But then, 3 years later, in 1950, a whole new team of investigators from the DA's office brings him back in for another chat. They were hoping, maybe he remembered some little detail he'd forgotten. In this interview, the one in 1950, this is where the case takes a really fascinating turn. When you read the transcript, you realize the investigators weren't just asking him random questions. Oh no, they had a very, very specific agenda. So what they did was they read Manley this long list of names pulled from Elizabeth's address book and their own lists of suspects. And it was a list with a lot of doctors on it. A Dr. Morris, a Dr. Bricks, Dr. Scott, plus some other persons of interest. And for every single name, Manley's answer was the same: nope, never heard her mention him.
And here's the real puzzle. Why was the DA's #1 suspect missing from that list? They asked about all these guys, all these doctors. Why would they go out of their way to not mention the one name that, by that point, was at the very top of their list?
Well, here's why. You see, 3 months before they even sat down with Manley, the lead investigator from the DA's office, a guy named Lieutenant Frank Jemison, had already secretly told the grand jury who his prime suspect was.
And that suspect was a Dr. George Hodel. He was this brilliant LA doctor, a certified genius, had a thing for surrealist art, and also a really dark, secretive private life. So this is the big question, right? If Hodel was their main guy, why on earth wouldn't they ask Manley about him? The answer is simple. They didn't need to ask.
See, just 2 weeks after that Manly interview, Jemison's task force was already bugging Hodell's house. He was playing this one close to the chest. He didn't want to tip his hand. He was past asking questions. He was about to start listening.
And what they heard on those secret microphones was absolutely chilling. The bugs picked up Hodell talking, admitting things. He said, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." For the investigators listening in, this was pretty much a confession.
So, let's just recap for a second. We've got a prime suspect who has the surgical skills, we've got a secret investigation, and now we have what sound like taped admissions. It really seems like the case was basically solved, right?
So, if the district attorney's office pretty much solved the murder way back in 1950, why is it still officially unsolved today? And this is where the story takes its darkest turn. It stops being about finding a killer and starts being about who that killer knew.
Because just as they were about to close in, Lieutenant Jemison gets an order from his superiors, and the order is to shut it down. Just like that, he was told to turn over all the files, all the tapes, all the transcripts to the LAPD's chief of detectives. The case was being ripped away from him.
But Jemison, he smelled a cover-up. So before he handed everything over, he did something pretty amazing. Fearing that all this work would just vanish, he secretly made a copy of his entire investigation file and locked it away in a DA vault for decades. It was basically his insurance policy, to make sure the truth didn't get buried.
And you know what? It's a really good thing he did. Because all that original evidence, the wiretap recordings, the transcripts, everything connecting George Hodell to the crime, it all disappeared from the official LAPD files, vanished. But thanks to Jemison's foresight, the truth wasn't lost forever.
So it leaves you with this really chilling question, doesn't it? How much of our history is buried in some lost case file? The Black Dahlia case is famous for being unsolved, but what if the evidence shows it was solved and then covered up? It really makes you wonder, how many other unsolved mysteries out there are only unsolved because somebody with power made sure the evidence just disappeared?